Hello gentlemen, welcome back to another video, and today we're going to talk about being a quitter. It's a very popular topic that I don't see many people diving into it quite as deep as I'd anticipated. Now, I'm guilty of this phenomenon back in the day, and I'm extremely sure that many of you gentlemen are also guilty of this, or maybe are suffering from this disease. Yes, I'd like to call it a disease because it literally does nothing but make you feel even more shit than you already are. Now, generally and generically, to avoid or to remove the quitter mindset from eating away at your soul is simply to not give up when you fail, right? To change your perspective of failure from a monumental and irreversible life-altering course towards the doomsday of hell to a necessary stepping stone in order to further cultivate ourselves towards a higher level in many aspects of life that we originally gave up in, or on the verge of giving up in. Everyone has been telling you all the same thing. You've all heard it a million times. Never give up. But what they rarely mention is in terms of the nuts and bolts of how or the way to rewire your mental firmware completely to that desirable point of view. Well, I'm going to try my best to deliver it to you gentlemen in this video. So first of all, let's look at failure through a rational and logical lens, shall we? Why do we fail? We fail because of a singular or a mixture of these three reasons. Number 1. Avoidance of responsibilities due to disinterest, fear, and idleness. It's simple and obvious. If you're not putting in the time and effort necessary in order to cultivate your level of skill, knowledge, and experience within a craft or situation, or because you lack enthusiasm, being afraid of failure, and are too lazy to take on an enormous challenge, or in other words, procrastinating way too much to the point of neglecting accountability, then you will by all means increase your chances of failure or lack of good results. Number 2. Insufficient fundamentals and preparation. Now, as much as you want to put in the time and effort on the right thing, sometimes it may not be enough to yield good results, or because you haven't delved deep enough into the complexities and intricacies of the problem within a craft or situation. Or in other words, you are too quick to generalize things and didn't pay enough attention and understanding into the details. We can certainly often get too ahead of ourselves and think that we know and understand what needed to be done, but in reality we are unaware of our own lack of attention to the details due to our inborn haste to make sound judgments as quickly as possible. And number 3, an unfocused, unstable, and preoccupied mind. This is what happens to those who choke in high-pressure situations and those who are slow learners. They are unable to be mentally present enough in the moment to focus on what's in front of them, and instead their concentration bubble gets gate-crashed and drifts off into distractions precipitated by things such as anxiety of future circumstances, emotional attachment to past circumstances, and letting other forms of curiosities or temptations interfere with their mental bandwidth. Now, from that logical sense, when we face failure, we basically are aware that there are certain components that we lack that causes us to deliver unsatisfying results, or to make major necessary changes so that we fulfill all those components. And all we need to do is to identify the holes in our work and where our weak links are, and emphasize more on them so that we can deliver better results the next time we make an attempt. However, in the age of emotions of today, we are unable to think this way, and instead, we took failure and look at them from an intimately personal standpoint and link them into a mystical and metaphysical narrative where we attach our own default emotional reactions towards it, for seemingly being permanently born to be cumbersome and incapable, and that we can do nothing about it besides self-deprecating ourselves through bawling our eyes out, getting envious from people who are capable, and seeking sympathy from people. You see, gentlemen, the reason why we took failure rather too personally nowadays is because we have developed an unhealthy emotional and superstitious attachment or narrative towards failure. We treat our current incompetence and unreliability as if they are bound to our eventual fate by the spiritual cosmos of the universe. And this kind of irrational, mythical, and spiritual thinking all started early in our age within our upbringings. How the environment and the people around us, especially figures of authority that we look up to and their level of control over us, embed the idea of failure, or anything for that matter, will have a dramatic effect in our attitude towards many aspects of life. I've said these exact same words in an earlier video, but it is without a doubt crucial within our childhood that we are instilled a mental firmware that could assist us in tackling the circumstances that life will throw at us as we grow up during our period of adolescence, especially by our parents. As human beings, the teachings and narratives that we grasp during our childhood years will have a huge rippling effect even when we are grown adults well within our years, because our profound level of curiosity as children amplifies our sense of passion and enthusiasm, whether it is positive or negative, which will predispose us to develop strong memories and a religious or instinctual responses over them. That is why we are often able to recall and remember circumstances from our childhood way more clearly and thoroughly than what we experienced during our adulthood. So if our overly controlling parents respond to our failures and instill them to us as a God-given sickness, then of course we will treat our failures as such every time we experience any form of failure. Such as if your father repeatedly called you a quote-unquote useless, brainless piece of shit who don't deserve anything and I wish you were never been born every time you got a D in any of your school tests, then you will inevitably reflect that narrative to yourself every time you face failures. But if your empathetic and reassuring father responds to you by saying these words when you experience failures:
why do we fall, sir? So that we can learn to pick ourselves up.
You still haven't given up on me.
Never.
Then you will inevitably recall that narrative to yourself every time you face failures, two completely different attitudes towards a similar circumstance. Now, unfortunately for a lot of us grown men in the modern era, we have been instilled those crippling and defeatist narrative towards failure by our parents and now being nailed into the coffin even more through the disillusioned and depressing emotional contents that we consumed every day of the year, as well as the demoralizing people we surround ourselves with every end of the week. And that made a lot of us gentlemen on suicide watch, reminding and defining our lives as nothing more than just a pointless and painful existence no matter how much we actually try to be better, even if we are already genuinely trying our very best. And that miserable sensation is all because of what narrative you have exposed yourself to and what narrative you are currently exposing yourself to that eventually contaminate your own mental dialogue with yourselves. Remember, gentlemen, the core, often unseen and uninterpreted objectives of our daily habits or routines will become the blueprint of the manner of approach in which our mentality dictates us. So how can we rewire our mental firmware to have a completely different and constructive view towards failure, so that we don't concede into submission through the emotions we experience during failures? Simple. Expose yourself thoroughly to the complete opposite narrative both internally and externally. What you used to conceive and believe can be intricately shifted through the curiosity and deductive reasonings of another belief set and eventually getting the results that you want out of them. Like for example, this video exposes you to a new narrative towards failure than what your parents or the people around you may have instilled within you all this time. And if you apply this narrative into your life and start to notice results and improvements, you will gradually adopt this narrative and abandon the old one. That is why a lot of us turn to motivational or self-improvement contents and figures of authority that are quite tough love in order for us to break free of our previous mentality and belief set that didn't get us anywhere we want to. It will take time to adopt a new mental firmware and it will be uncomfortable as our mind is like a muscle. It needs to be trained to adapt to a new stimulus and environment. Diverting your mind away from what you are used to routinely or religiously visualize and cogitate will be an uncomfortable process. But it is absolutely necessary to make cognizant changes if you are not getting the results that you want out of your current arsenal. And I don't want to sound like a motivational speaker at all, but it is necessary to say this. Quitting is a choice. As long as you don't quit living, there is always a chance for you to get somewhere in life. They are both rationally and metaphorically true. Thank you for watching.